I'm Troy Dodds, and welcome to the On The Record podcast presented by The Western Weekender. On this podcast, I'm joined by special guests who all have such great stories to tell about Penrith and the role that they've played in our city. They are Penrith stories told by Penrith people. Today, my guest is Ross Free. Ross has the honour of being the first ever member for Lindsay, serving in both the Hawke and Keating ministries. He had a long political career at a time when Penrith was going through enormous change and growth. I really hope you enjoy our chat. Ross, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Troy. Looking forward to it.
Now, first question we always ask, where were you born and where'd you grow up?
Okay, I was born in Bathurst in 1943, which puts me in my 80th year as we speak, and grew up there, went to school there, first in my family to finish high school.
Right, okay.
And then on to Sydney to university. That was when a tiny minority of Australians actually got to go to university, and the only place you could really go was Sydney.
Do I glean from that you were a pretty good student?
Worked hard. My mother and father were children of the Depression, and they had the firm view that the way forward in life was education, and that's something that I've believed too, and passed on to my children.
Now, at that point in time, as you head to uni, is politics in your mind, or is it about becoming a teacher? Because I think teaching was something you were pretty passionate about.
Well, it was, yes. I'd always wanted to teach, but certainly politics was in my mind, because this was in the early 60s, and this was at the time of the Vietnam War. And this was at the time of conscription, when some of your listeners are probably too young to remember, but young men of 19 were unwilling participants in a lottery. If their birthday was drawn out of the barrel, then they were conscripted into the military for 2 years, and liable to do overseas service as well. So it was a very contentious time, and lots of demonstrations in the street.
Yep.
And you've probably heard your grandparents talk about it, Troy.
Yeah. Hey, well, I mean, it was a difficult time, I guess, in Australian history as well. But as you say, it did prompt people like yourself to say, well, I want to be in a position where I can potentially make a difference.
That's right. And the country was fractured, it had been fractured several times during its history, of course. But really the way the country was fractured under Scott Morrison, and the way America was fractured under Donald Trump.
Going back, you graduated from Sydney Uni. And,
no, New South Wales.
New South Wales, sorry.
Yeah, brand new university.
Yeah. And started work as a teacher.
Correct, yes. I started work in the New South Wales public education system. Started work at Sydney Boys High in Moore Park in Sydney, which was a kind of an unusual place. It was the only public school that was and still is a member of the GPS, the Greater Public Schools, the ones who row on the Nepean every year, and for that reason, in the New South Wales Teachers Service, it was regarded as a kind of educational Camelot, highly selective school, and a delight to work there.
And how long did you end up working there?
5 years, and by that stage, my wife and I had established ourselves at Springwood. And kids started to arrive, as they do.
Yes.
And commuting to Sydney really wasn't on the books, so I took a job at Springwood High School, and enjoyed the delights of being able to walk to work.
And at that time, you're now in Springwood. Politics and actually running for politics. When did that first come into the possibility for you?
Well, I joined the Labor Party back in my Sydney days, and maintained my membership when I moved to the mountains, and the usual thing that people do when they become interested in politics. You attend branch meetings, which can be terribly exciting or terribly not so, and you do the normal stuff to get your local candidate elected, and and to make sure the party is successful at local government level, state level, federal level. The kinds of things that you're familiar dealing with as running a local newspaper.
Indeed. And for you, why Labor? Was Labor entrenched in your family background, or was it something in particular that drew you to Labor?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Politics in those days was very heavily class-based. I came from a working class family, a railway family in Bathurst, if that starts to ring bells.
Yep.
That's where Ben Chifley came from, the engine driver.
Indeed.
And my family home is in South Bathurst, just round the corner from where Ben and Elizabeth Chifley lived. So it was just natural that if you belong to belong to a railway family, then you were a Labor family.
Now, Ross, you try to win the seat of Macquarie in the Blue Mountains in the 1970s. You eventually get elected in 1980. Tell me about that time.
A sitting member back then was Tony Lucchetti, great man, an unsung hero in a lot of ways. Never reached ministerial rank, unfortunately, because the Labor Party spent so much time out of office. But Chifley decided in 1975 that he'd had enough, that he'd earned his retirement, and so I ran for pre-selection for Macquarie in 1975. Won it pretty easily, but as it turned out, 1975 was a pretty bad year to be a candidate for the Labor Party because, again, older Australians will tell you that's when the country was fractured. Along the lines of people who thought that John Kerr was doing the right thing and Malcolm Fraser, by refusing supply to the elected Whitlam government, was doing the right thing. So there was an election in 1975, and I was defeated, which came as a shock because the seat had been in Labor hands for 31 years.
Right, okay. So were you confident heading into that election, or were the numbers telling you? I mean, these days they say, they can pretty much predict where everything's falling. Was it like that back then?
That's right. They can tell you the blood groups of the people who are
that's right,
and how they're voting. It wasn't like that so much in that time. It was pretty clear that the country was fracturing. The Whitlam government wasn't doing as well as maybe it could have. I would argue that it's because they were never given a chance by Fraser and the team who had control of the Senate.
Sure.
But whatever the rights and wrongs of that are, that's a long while ago, and the people decide, and the people, we always like to say the people get it right, and they weren't having me in 1975. Well, Malcolm Fraser became the Prime Minister, he became the Prime Minister before that. He was made Prime Minister by the Governor-General, and then a month later was elected Prime Minister. And he knew he was on a good thing, of course, and held an election pretty quickly afterwards in 1977, just the 2 years, had a redistribution. And again, Macquarie was up for grabs, and again I ran, and again I was defeated, only narrowly both times actually. The count went on for about 10 days in those days.
Right, okay, yep.
It really dragged on, and the Herald used to publish the yesterday's progress of the count in these few remaining seats. But
so this leaves Macquarie as a Liberal seat for two
terms.
Reg Gillard, I think.
Gillard, yes, that's right.
The member.
Yeah, one time mayor of Lithgow.
And then, so two defeats. Were you or the party questioning whether you should go in 1980, or was there always the feeling that third time lucky was around the corner?
Well, the Labor Party was good to me. It's always been good to me. It's always been good to me, and really it was up to me, and in this sense it was up to my wife, because we had 3 little kids at this stage.
Yep.
And if you're a government employee, you must resign before seeking election.
Sure, yep.
So that means that the income suffers during an election campaign as well. But Margaret was very, very good and backed me as well. And I thought, well, I gave it everything I had, and on that occasion, and the boundaries, by the way, extended east then, and to take in St Mary's as well. Pretty good territory for us in those days.
Yep.
I mean, that's for the Labor Party.
Yes.
And so the election, Fraser held the election in October the 18th, 1980. I remember it well.
A night, I'm guessing, of mixed emotions, because you are elected as the member for Macquarie, but Labor doesn't form government.
Labor doesn't form government. Yes, my word, your political history is darn good. Doesn't form government, but I had the distinction of being... we only won 2 seats, the Labor Party in New South Wales, at that election. Bill Morrison won back his old seat of St George. He was Whitlam's Defence Minister. And I was the only newbie to win a seat, so I was pretty proud of that. And all that work paid off, and the very generous support of the unsung heroes of local politics, the branch members who get out and do the stuff and walk around the letterboxes and all of that. So I mean that was awfully satisfying.
What was it? And we'll talk about being in government later, but was it difficult? I always ponder this question for some of our current politicians, even locally, who are in this position now. Is it difficult to be, you're the local member, but there's all these roadblocks up because you're not in government? Yeah,
sure. That can be a very interesting time to learn, and to you become much more self-reliant. You depend on your colleagues a lot more, and they've got more time for you too.
Yeah.
Because they're not ministers running departments, and that gave me a chance to get to know the Parliament, get a better understanding of how it works, get to know what kind of a person Fraser was, and other people on the other side of the Parliament. I mean, Fraser was back in those days a sort of monster as far as Labor people was concerned, but he had another side, and I'll give you an example. There was a visiting group of young people from overseas, sponsored by the local Lions clubs, and they asked me if I could get them in to see the Prime Minister and have a photograph taken. And I thought, well, what kind of a chance have I got? You know, I just knocked off one of his people, and I put in the request, and no, come round. Malcolm came out and had the photographer organised, and was awfully nice to these kids. And I thought, yeah, you know. That's really good. I'll tell you another example, by the way, that has particular local resonance as well. At that stage, let's go to Penrith Railway Station.
Sure.
North of the railway station was Defence Department land. It was a base. And my predecessor had been trying for ages to get the Defence Department to release the land. In fact, I think that was my first appointment as local member. I met with Barry Long, the town clerk then, general manager now, yep. And he explained the problem, and could I see if I could get the Defence Department to get its hooks off this land, and so I thought, well, like if my predecessor couldn't do any good, being of the same political colour, what chance have I got? But I went to the Minister for Administrative Services. He gave me an appointment, and I explained that the council wanted to get access to this land to develop commuter car parking. And he said, this sounds all right to me. And he had a member, a representative of his department there, and he said, look, I think we can do something here. And as a result, Barry Long and the council and Bruce McDonald, the chief town planner, got what they'd been after: northern access to the railway station and decent car parking. I mean, it was a planner's dream. So I felt very lucky, Troy. Very lucky.
Just goes to show you can get stuff done in opposition. In terms of making a difference for people and not just being I guess an annoying noise in the background. You can be a squeaky wheel and actually get something done about it.
That's right. I mean, don't make an idiot of yourself in the process, and don't abuse the government too much in the House. But it's a similar story with the area on which the Civic Centre now stands.
Yep.
I don't know how far your history goes back, but
yeah, fairly well.
Fairly well. Okay.
Yes, I think I was still in high school when the Civic Centre was opened. So.
There you are. Okay. Well, yeah, I christened it Battlestar Galactica at that stage, but that was that was owned by the RAAF, and it was a barracks for RAAF personnel, employees at Richmond and up at Glenbrook. And I thought, well, council made the request, I'll give it a go. And once again, wonderful.
Got the result.
Got the result. And I thought, and it was over that time, by the way, that I really developed an enormous respect for the professionalism of Penrith Council. Mm-hmm. I do hope that the residents of Penrith appreciate how really professional and really good Penrith Council, its staff, and mostly I think its elected representatives as well, do.
Yeah, it's a tough gig to be able to run a city of this size, and certainly do a good job.
Well, yeah. It's and to make these things happen, you need the cooperation of all three levels of government.
And we see that quite a lot these days. We see a lot of the three levels working together, which is good.
That's right. The three levels work together as well. In another case, where did you go to high school, by the way?
Jamison High School.
Jamison High School.
Yes.
Wally Mulheron was your first boss.
Was he?
Yeah. You probably don't remember.
I don't remember. Yeah.
Well, he was my boss up at Springwood High. Jamison High. I was there at the opening. Yeah. Anyway, back then, you'll recall the old Q Theatre.
Yes, indeed.
And behind it, the drill hall. Do you remember the drill hall?
Yep, for sure.
That was Commonwealth land as well, the drill hall and all that. Mm-hmm. And Penrith Council again. They were always thinking ahead, thinking beyond the horizon.
Sure.
They thought what we need is some big employers in the place. We need a regional tax office. Again, the town clerk, Barry Long, and the planner came along, and we had a yarn. And again, the Commonwealth came good, because I don't put it down to my eloquence particularly, but the Commonwealth could see this. The government could see the sense in building Penrith up into a major centre, and wherever government can play a role in that, so it should, and it did.
Let me take you back to 1983, and first let me ask you, when did you first meet Bob Hawke?
Oh, many years before then. Bob came to campaign for me in 1977, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, because Bob then was heading up the ACTU, and he was a member of the Reserve Bank Board, which was the only way he could get to Sydney, because that's where the Reserve Bank Board met.
Sure.
And they'd fly him up, and he'd say, "Well, I'll come and do something for you."
In 1983, whenever there's a shift in power, you generally can feel it. This year, 2022 is a prime example of that. You can feel that the changes in the air. Go back to 2007 as well, and 96, which we'll talk about. But could you feel it in 83 that it was?
Yes, you're very perceptive. Yes, I thought we're going to do all right out of this, because remember before 83, I was a backbencher in an opposition, and Bob wasn't in Parliament. Bill Hayden was the leader. It's a wonderfully decent fellow, wonderful bloke, and. Hawke was elected in 1980, so Hawke and I were both backbenchers together, and he was on the front bench actually. He went straight in as Shadow Minister for Labour and Industrial Relations. But of course, ambition being what it is, Hawke hadn't come to Canberra to play number 2 to anybody, and there was a challenge in the middle of the year, and I made a choice. I voted for Hawke. It was people should never take these challenges lightly. They're really.
I was going to say even when, and we've seen a lot of it in recent years.
Or too much.
Too much for sure. But even when you must feel within, look, it's the right thing to do, there still must be that little bit of guilt there that exists.
That's right. There's the old wrench in the gut. There's no doubt about that. And the only advice I could go back to was the written advice I'd seen from Ben Chifley to say, look, irrespective of your personal likes or dislikes, cast your vote in what you think is the best interests of your party. That's what you're there for. I went to a local branch meeting about a week before that, and of course the branch members were talking about it, and they were toing and froing, and I said, look, help me out here. Those of you who think I should vote for Bill Hayden, please hands up. Those who think I should vote for Hawke, please hands up. They were pretty well split down the middle, and I said, well, thanks a lot.
Well, in the end, you backed the right horse, of course, because Bob Hawke becomes Prime Minister in 1983.
True.
You now sit in government. But not long after this, a significant change happens because there's a major redistribution, and the move is on for you to move into this newly created seat called Lindsay. So can you tell us how did all that come about, and so soon too after the 83 election?
Right, yeah. Well, that was the government. The new government had a plan, and that was to increase the number of seats in the House of Representatives. Enrolments in those days were getting very, very large. I had the second in Macquarie. I didn't have it, but Macquarie had the second largest enrolment in the country, stretching from all the way from Mount Victoria then down to Colleton, and in fact, it's part of my pay in those days. I got extra money for representing an electorate of more than 100,000 voters. I think they're all more than 100,000 now. But we did this on 2 staff, by the way, which is another current thing.
Yeah, very different world now.
Yeah. So the government, the new Labor government, decided that we should try and legislate to get more seats of smaller and more sensible enrolments. That also means that you'll have more people in the Senate.
Yep.
And none of that legislation we could get through without the cooperation of the National Party. And the National Party was run then by, I think by Doug Anthony, or it might have been Ian Sinclair, but I think it was Doug. It was Doug, yeah. And he could see the sense in cutting down the numbers of electors per seat, because the National Party, then the Country Party, was going out of business.
Right, yep.
Each redistribution there'd be a Country Party seat abolished.
Yep.
And they were, so that was a cooperation between the Labor Party and the Country Party to get that legislation through. And that's when Lindsay was created, and a number of seats in New South Wales. Dobell up on the Central Coast was created.
And as a result, you become the first ever member for Lindsay, something that will never get taken away.
No. Well, that's right. They were the party was very kind and said, well, sitting members can have first dibs.
Yeah.
And I had Lindsay, which I thought was a wonderful, sensible, natural seat, or Macquarie, and it consisted of the Upper Mountains down to, in that stage, Warramoo.
Yep.
And across to Richmond and Windsor and up the Putty Road. And I thought, I will I would go nuts trying to represent Macquarie.
Yeah.
It is
Was it a tough call though, because the Blue Mountains for you was home?
It was.
Was it a tough call?
Well, yeah, and the seats as electoral prospects were pretty much even Stevens. So there was that. I was determined that I owed it to my family and my kids not to move, because the kids at that stage were established in school with their networks, and I said to the party, look, here I am living. At that stage I was living in Falconbridge. I'm 10 minutes away from the boundary of Lindsay. Can you give me a break on this one? And they did, very generously, very generously. And so I became a sort of I wasn't an absentee landlord, but I was a non-resident.
Sure. But obviously doing something right, because you'd become the MP for the next 12 or so years. Tell me what Penrith was like in the mid-'80s, late 80s, in that era.
Well, it was a lovely place, and it still is. But it was, have you read the book about Penrith in those days, Some Everyday Folk at Dawn?
I haven't actually, no.
Yeah, no, but
track that down.
It's lovely, yeah, track it down. And it retained a lot of the qualities of a country town. Remember, the highway ran through Penrith.
Yep.
There was no such thing as a freeway. No such thing as high rise either.
Yeah. But a time of pretty significant growth as well. Like by the time the early 90s come around,
well,
Penrith is growing significantly.
It certainly was. Yes, the mid to late 80s and early 90s, the population was going gangbusters, and young families with children, often two-income families. Mind you, you could buy a house and land for $35,000.
Yeah, I mean, we wish, right?
we wish.
Can you remember, just out of interest, where was the first office in Penrith for you?
The first office for me. Well, it was round in Castlereagh Street.
Okay.
It was above the dry cleaners, which wasn't a very upstairs office. Above the dry cleaners, so there were plenty of noxious chemicals in the air. And I was determined to have a ground floor office.
Yeah.
So Peter Anderson was the state member at that time, and I negotiated with the council, and we got space in the old council chambers down in Station Street.
Okay.
And the premises I vacated became the Penrith Adult Relaxation Centre.
there you go.
There you go.
Now, during this period too, you know, some different things happened for you. You head overseas a fair bit as well.
Well,
in those early kind of days as a member for Lindsay.
Yeah, I was over a bit. Our first trip was to Israel, actually.
Okay.
Which was quite interesting, and. Yeah, I did a bit of overseas travel, not as much as some, I must say.
No.
And
I think Germany was in there as well for a period.
Yeah.
That delegation there.
That was quite strange. We had an annual delegation that used to visit the European institutions in Strasbourg, in Alsace-Lorraine, in France, where the European Parliament is, and also a body called the Council of Europe meets, and we still send an all-party delegation of observers to there, and a country on the continent then hosts us for excuse me, about a week. So yeah, I went in probably 85, I think. And at that stage, we did the stuff in Strasbourg, which is terribly interesting. And the host country was East Germany,
right?
The Democratic Republic of East Germany. And I thought this will be interesting. The first communist country I was down to visit. And I actually didn't get to go. I was called back.
Right.
There was an important division apparently to be held in the Parliament, and I had to come back. So that was it. I didn't get to see East Germany. But as a consolation prize, I was sent the following year with the host country was West Germany.
Right. Okay.
And that was the year of the 25th anniversary of the building of the Berlin Wall. So we were in West Berlin at the right time and guests of the council, all that kind of thing, and learned a lot about the place, learned a lot about history too, of course. And I remember making a speech. I was invited to make it by our host, the Berlin Council. And I said, well, here we are, on the 25th anniversary of a revolting act, building of a wall that separated families, all this kind of thing. And heavens above, 4 years later, down came the wall. So.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Hawke wins the next few elections. You remain the member for Lindsay through the 80s. Safe to say, Penrith pretty much, and Lindsay is very much Labor entrenched in Labor heartland during that late 80s period.
Yeah, as Daniel Danuto would have said, it's the vibe, man. It was the vibe. Hawke could do no wrong. We as a government, well, we weren't perfect, but we did an awful lot that was right. And we had an opposition that was off balance all the time. You might remember at the same time, Howard and Peacock were interminably struggling about who was going to be leader, and consequently there was one night when both the Liberal Party and the National Party changed leadership. It was just
Now, of course, Hawke could do no wrong, but of course things change. In the early 1990s, Paul Keating becomes Prime Minister. Tell us about that period, that changeover. Pretty tumultuous time.
That was tough. I'd had several attempts to get into the ministry, and Hawke was a bit of an expert on saying, "Oh no, not this time, but don't worry, don't worry.
Bide your time, and you'll get there eventually."
Yep. As a kind of consolation, he made me his parliamentary secretary, which was an important job, and I liked doing it very much, and I got to see him close up, and that was all good. But at the same time, as you say, Keating was getting restless. Keating was getting restless, and at the same time, the Liberals had decided on John Hewson as leader. And their new leader, economics professor, developed the Fight Back policy, which was a document about 4 centimetres thick, I suppose. It was so complicated that you might remember that Hewson got tripped up because he couldn't tell you where GST applied to birthday cake.
Yes, the famous interview.
Yeah, but at this stage, Hewson was the one who could do no wrong, and he really was making Hawke look pretty ordinary, and it affected the morale of the whole party. And I came to the decision that if we didn't change, it was one of those Chifley decisions. Forget about any personal feelings you might have. What's the best thing for the Labor Party's future? So I was a loyalist of Keating's. I voted for him in the first challenge, in which he was unsuccessful, and then again in the second challenge when he was successful on December the 19th, I think, 91.
Yeah, just before Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, yeah.
And of course, you continue to serve in the ministry with Paul Keating. You become, though what I guess would now be called the Education Minister, the Minister for Schools. Was that what they called it?
First job he gave me was Minister for Science and Technology.
Yep.
And responsible for the CSIRO and all that kind of stuff. It's part of the job that Ed Husick, the member for Chifley, has now.
Yep.
And a very thoroughly enjoyable job. Meet wonderful people, and you get to make real reforms, particularly in the research area. So I had that, and in the election, the government and the Keating government was re-elected in '93, and I thought, well, they wanted somebody new in education, in school education, and vocational education and TAFE.
And your background, of course, suited that.
That's right. I thought, I could do that. Yeah.
But it's interesting, actually, because I've written about this before, that so often now we have ministers who don't have any background in their portfolio whatsoever. But here you were, a uni graduate, a former teacher of decades, taking on the education portfolio. Like, it's what we want, right?
I knew a bit about that stuff. Yes, yes. So, and importantly, if you want to get anything done in the education area, you need to know the people in the unions. And the strike, which was on yesterday.
Yes. Yep.
Of teachers in the New South Wales public system and the New South Wales Catholic system, all went out. Now, a minister who has got across her portfolio needs, in this case, female in New South Wales.
Yep, Sarah Mitchell. Yep.
Sarah Mitchell really should have had better relationships with those unions, in my view.
Yeah, we don't want it to get to that point, I guess, is the...
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody likes strikes.
No. Least of which everyone who it affects along the way.
Yeah, least of all the trade unionists.
Yeah.
Or the trade unionist partners, because you don't get paid.
Yes, very true. I want to take it to 1996.
Yes, indeed.
And this election, we know that John Howard becomes Prime Minister. We can look at the history books and figure out why. But you go into that election with a margin of, I think, 10%. Were you confident, or was it, again, we go back to that feeling of there's change in the air?
Well, there's two things about that margin. It was a bit of a false figure because an interesting thing happened at the previous election. I think of Australian Democrats.
Yeah.
The Democrat candidate arrived 5 minutes late and couldn't nominate.
Right. Okay.
And so my vote was inflated. But yeah, I can tell you, I could smell something in the air, and I can offer you proof if you like. The Thursday, probably before election day, Maggie Deem, who was the federal member for Macquarie, and I both visited Glenbrook RAAF base to inspect the premises and talk to the service men and women there. And there was a guy from one of the local newspapers, I think it might have been yours actually.
There you go. Yeah.
Was there.
Yep.
And we'd done the bit and shaken hands and had afternoon tea and all of this, and we walked out onto the lawn outside the mess, and this guy said, "Now I want you and Maggie to," and this way there's a magnificent view of Penrith, "I want you and Maggie to jump up in the air, V for victory, and I'll get a photo." And I said, "No, we're not doing that." Maggie said, "Why not?" I said, "I think I'm going to get done on Saturday. And if I'm going to get done with my margin, you're going to get done too, baby."
Yeah.
So we didn't do the photo.
That election becomes pretty synonymous with Howard's battlers.
It does.
Did you feel that about Lindsay at the time, that they really grabbed onto something there with that term and that push?
Well, I wasn't familiar with the term. Except from Howard's lips, and I really didn't have much time for anything that came from Howard's lips. But tell you what my staff said to me. They said, I said, how's the office going? Is it busy? I was ringing in from wherever I was, and very quiet. Very quiet. So it's a bit like the scene in one of those old black and white Western movies. It was quiet in town. Yeah. Too quiet.
It becomes a bit of you'd almost say a bloodbath. I think you're not alone. I think 12 or 13 seats fall at 96.
Try 30.
For Labor.
There were 13 ministers defeated, I think.
Okay, yeah. So a bad night.
Not a good night. Yeah.
But there's almost a second shot at it because, of course, Lindsay becomes a bit of a debacle. There's another election held because Jackie Kelly was serving, I think, as an RAAF officer and hadn't resigned, and you go again as a campaign Mark 2.
Good old Section 44 of the Constitution, yeah. 2 simple rules, and she really was a naughty girl because she was a lawyer, and they must have done constitutional law at Queensland University. Section 44 is quite simple. It says to stand as a candidate for election to the federal parliament, you must be a citizen of Australia and of no other country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she'd done the first bit, but she hadn't renounced her New Zealand citizenship. And there's another subclause in Section 44 that says if you seek to become elected to the Australian Parliament, then you must not hold an office of profit under the Crown, which means you must not be employed by government or any of its agencies.
Yeah.
And she hadn't resigned from the Air Force. So she hit two home runs on Section 44.
Yeah.
And the High Court, of course, decided that she was not eligible to sit. Now, as all the Section 44 cases that have flowed from then, all of them approved. I don't think anybody excluded from Parliament under Section 44 who has sought re-election, and I think they all have, none of those were defeated.
I guess part of that is the public feels, well, we made our call, and so you're telling us to make it again. We're just going to make the same call.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. You're dead on the money there. Dead right on the money.
Because as much as, say, Section 44 needs to be there and is important to be there, it probably doesn't play into the public's mind of how they vote on election.
No, and it's very naughty of candidates to ignore Section 44, and it's very naughty of their political parties not to be vetting them on that score. But as far as the public's concerned, we made our choice, and you then decided that. Well, the court decided, but I took the blame.
and of course, the by-election happens. Jackie Kelly wins the seat.
Yeah.
And so ends your time as
4% swing. Yeah. Like that's it. Yeah.
So ends your time as the member for Lindsay.
Yeah.
Were you disappointed, or do you just look back on it and say that was a pretty long stint? Across 2 prime ministers. You had a lot of things done. A great time in Penrith. Is it mixed emotions when that sort of thing happens?
It's not the way I would have chosen to go. But if you can't bear to lose, you don't deserve to ever win.
Yeah.
So that's very very few people leave Parliament feeling completely fulfilled. I can tell you that.
Yeah, not many people leave on their own terms, I guess.
No, that's right. But it was. I can honestly say that every day I spent in there representing the people of Penrith and St Mary's was an absolute delight. I never counted it as work.
Now, I hate to tell you, Ross, but it was more than a quarter of a century ago that finished up.
Absolutely.
It goes quick. What have you been doing in the time since? What did you do immediately afterwards? But in the time since, I know you're still in the Blue Mountains.
Yeah, I served for a while in a voluntary capacity on on the universities. Well, it was UWS then. Now it's WSU. But I mean, that's one thing that we didn't discuss, of course. Then that was an initiative involving council and me and Tony Aquilina, who was the state member for Penrith back then. But yeah, I served on the university's regional council, and that was great fun. And then doing odds and sods, working for the teachers' union, the National Teachers' Union, the Australian Education Union, getting them to understand how to deal with politicians, how to deal with political parties, how to get the things that they believe are important addressed in policy platforms and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Otherwise, Troy, the two G's that we all get to at my stage of life, and you will no doubt as well, the two G's, that's gardening and grandchildren.
Indeed. And family, big part of your life?
Very much so, yes, yes.
Now, when you look at today's politics, so since we had a long John Howard stint, but then of course you've seen some Labor Prime Ministers, new Labor Prime Ministers come through, in Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, now Anthony Albanese. What do you think of politics today in Australia?
I think it's tougher, and I really take my hat off to people who go into it or aspire to go into it. I think it's less kind than it used to be. Like relationships across the chamber with the other side, back in my time, were pretty cordial.
Yep.
Once Fraser and Anthony and Peter Nixon and people like that who were involved in the coup to get rid of Whitlam, once they'd left, it became a better place. I think probably once Howard and Bronwyn Bishop had left, it became a better place. And I particularly mentioned Bronwyn Bishop. They were silly enough to make her Speaker. Now, without a doubt, she was the worst Speaker that Parliament, that the House of Representatives has ever had. I don't know whether you made a practice of looking in on question time or not.
Look, it's thrilling watching. I know every, from 2 o'clock most afternoons.
That's right.
Sitting time,
so she wasn't interested in fostering a cooperative environment in the place. She was interested in confrontation. She was quite good at that. So I think she made it a harder place for people to be in. And of course, Abbott was a very confrontational Prime Minister too. So I do hope when the new Parliament meets at the end of, well, it's this month now, July, that they elect a Speaker much along the lines of Tony Smith. I mean, the Libs realised they'd made a mistake with Bishop, so that Tony Smith was a much better and more sensible person than Bronwyn could ever aspire to be. And as a result, he was, I think, sadly missed by all when he went. Yeah.
We'll wait and see what the next few years brings. The last question we always ask on the record: how would Ross Free like to be remembered in Penrith?
Oh, look, I don't expect it to be remembered particularly at all. I suppose I'd like to be kindly remembered, and I'd like to be remembered as you don't really get remembered for buildings, you know, but I'd like to be remembered as somebody who had a major hand in the establishment of our own tertiary education network here, the University of Western Sydney, or WSU. I don't know if I'll ever get used to that. I think that's a great step forward, and a recognition of the needs of the area, and the fact that the area has a future. It's a bit like think back to that kid who had to leave Bathurst to go to Sydney to to try and get some letters after his name. Like these kids don't have it quite as tough, thanks to probably something that I did way back then. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, it is an extraordinary political career, and as I mentioned, no one can take away the fact. First ever member for Lindsay. Ross, thank you very much for joining us.
Troy, thank you, and can I congratulate you on running one of the surviving print newspapers.
Thank you very much. We love doing what we do, and
they were all around the place when I was
indeed
a local representative. But it can't be easy surviving in the current environment. But you, the Weekender, and the Gazette are still standing. So congratulations.
Indeed, thank you very much. Well, I hope you enjoyed our chat. On the Record is produced by the Western Weekender. To hear future episodes, search Western Weekender wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you hit subscribe. Check out westernweekender.com.au. And we'll see you next time.